The Metamorphosis, Kafka. For many, just the mention of Kafka and his infamous book would bring to mind the words confusing, strange, and disgusting, and perhaps the nagging feeling that there is something not quite right with the picture. After all, what stranger story could a person relate than one in which a human transforms into a bug overnight, is kept locked in his room for months by his family, and eventually dies, with seemingly no moral to learn from the odd and convoluted masterpiece that is the Metamorphosis. However, though this may be how most remember the creepiest novel they read in high school, Kafka is trying to tell us something through his odd literary creation. By allowing us to follow the details of the metamorphosis that Gregor and his family undergo, Kafka demonstrates the inextricable connection between the individual and the greater society, proving that the state of one reflects upon the other, whether positively or negatively. Kafka's concept is not a new one. John Locke, an English philosopher during the English Civil War, argued the very same idea, suggesting that the individual is born a blank slate or tabula rasa. More on this is our senior historical correspondent, Sacha Goldfield.
Thank you, Sacha. Like you said, John Locke was one of the most influential philosophers during the English Civil War. He argued that human beings are born a tabula rasa, like a blank page upon which thought would be written. Not naturally corrupt or good, humans rather acquired these traits through exposure to them in the already existent society. Because of this, the human condition could be improved. One was not simply trapped within the natural state of humans, forced to work within those limits, as Thomas Hobbes and opposing philosophers suggested. Instead, by improving the environment, or external influences, within which humans operated, the condition of the individual itself would be improved.
This suggests a powerful correlation between the society and the individual, then.
Yes, indeed it does. Locke postulated that it is through internal reflection upon knowledge supplied by experience that made an individual who he was.
You know, I would even go so far to say that the same notion would apply to Gregor in the Metamorphosis.
Really? What makes you say that?
Well, I would argue that Gregor's metamorphosis is a sign of a deeper underlying self-doubt within himself. This, of course, was not born in him. It was, rather, his family's treatment of him throughout his life that created this trait through a lack of recognition and appreciation. Perhaps his family always isolated him, and his physical metamorphosis is simply a natural manifestation of that which his family has already written upon the blank slate of his personality.
What an interesting connection. Yes, I would certainly say that relates to John Locke's ideas.
Thank you, Sacha. It has been great talking to you about John Locke and the Metamorphosis.
Of course. Glad to be here.
It is obvious that there is strong evidence of connection between the individual and the environment in the tabula rasa theory of John Locke. But this concept extends beyond the world of humans. An evolutionary concept known as coevolution shows that the strong influence that can be found between the individual and society can also exist between two entirely different species. Pretty wild, huh? Here to tell us about coevolution is Natasha Whitefield. Good to have you here, Natasha.
Hello, Sacha. It's great to be here.
So, can you explain a bit of this coevolution concept to us?
Of course. That's what I'm here for. Coevolution is a concept of evolution in which two completely different species evolve parallel to each other. You see, as one adapts to gain an advantage, the other undergoes a correlated adaptation.
Wow, and how exactly does that work?
Perhaps it would be easier to understand if I give you an example. A great example of coevolution is the relationship between acacia ants and acacia trees. The ants live in the hollow thorns of the acacia tree, eating a substance excreted by the tree. In turn, the ants defend the tree from herbivores and removed fungal spores.
I'm familiar with a bit of biology myself, and that sounds like the species are mutually symbiotic. I'm not sure I understand the difference between symbiosis and coevolution.
You are quite right, Sacha. The acacia ants and the acacia trees are mutually symbiotic. In other words, they possess a relationship that is mutually beneficial. However, symbiosis only implies two species having a close relationship over a long period of time. Coevolution, on the other hand, goes further to say that the changes are reciprocal, or that the changes in one species are triggered by changes in the other species.
Oh, I think I understand now. So, one species adapts to specific changes in the other.
Quite right, Sacha.
Now that I understand the process of coevolution, it's occurred to me that the concept connects very strongly not only to the theme of the metamorphosis, but also to an evolutionary process that occurs between the characters themselves. I would even say it closely resembles coevolution.
Now I'm the one who's having trouble understanding.
You see, throughout the book, Gregor and his family undergo a series of changes that, when taken as a whole, amount to a metamorphosis.
Yes, I see how that connects to the title of the book. But how does that relate to coevolution?
I'm getting to that. You see, though seemingly uncorrelated, the changes Gregor and his family undergo are actually fundamentally connected. As Gregor undergoes one change, such as beginning to work as a traveling salesman, his family changes to become even more ungrateful and even lazy. This process of back and forth evolution continues as the story progresses. Gregor turns into a bug in response to his family's ungrateful and critical treatment, and his family changes, in turn, to fully reject and isolate him. Then, as Gregor becomes more and more bug-like mentally, his family becomes increasingly competent in their own lives. This process of coevolution is completed when Gregor dies, completing his metamorphosis. In response, his family completes their own metamorphosis, feeling empowered and hopeful for the future. The changes in Gregor and his family are not independent. On the contrary, they are inseparably linked.
What a fascinating connection. That would never have occurred to me, but that most definitely resembles coevolution, just in human relationships.
Well, I never could have made the connection without your fantastic explanation of coevolution. Thank you for your time, Natasha.
Well, of course. I'm glad to be of help.
Remarkably, it is not only species that evolve. Many other processes involve evolution. One of the most interesting of these is the evolution of language over time. The relationship between the individual and society can be compared to the relationship between society and language. More on this is Tanasha Bluefield. So, Tanasha, what can you tell us about the evolution of language?
Hey there, Sacha. I'm your linguistic correspondent for today. So glad to be here.
Glad to hear that, Tanasha. Nice to start off with a bit of enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm? I love enthusiasm.
I can see that. Can we get to the topic, please?
Of course, my bad. Let's get started. Okay, Oh, that's right. The evolution of language. Well, you see, obviously, language has set patterns. It's all about establishing common understanding for what a certain thing means. But it is not static, not in the least. No, it's a dynamic system, an evolving system. Language is constantly evolving. It's evolving right now as I speak.
So, how is it exactly that languages can evolve?
Well, there's still a lot of controversy in the field of linguistics over what factors have the most effect on language evolution. For example, though there is consensus that humans have a pre-adaptation toward developing language, as in our brains are wired to do so, many other ideas remain subjects of dispute. For example, it's unclear whether biological evolution of humans or the evolution of human culture has a greater impact on the evolution of language.
I see. Well, perhaps you can explain to us a theory that has a great deal of consensus then.
I'm so glad you asked. In fact, I brought a spectacular diagram right here with me just in case.
Really? Where is it?
In my head, Sacha. Let me just transmit it to your whiteboard. If you would turn your attention to the whiteboard, please.
Of course. Let's get the camera on the whiteboard.
Just in case you're wondering, this diagram was found in Trends in Cognitive Sciences in the article Language Evolution, Consensus and Controversy. Don't you love internet? Anyway, the diagram shows the interactions between three systems that language arises from: individual learning, cultural transmission, and biological evolution. Biological evolution determines how the individual learns language. The individual's use and learning of language then influence the cultural transmission of language. As described in Trends in Cognitive Sciences, quote, the knowledge of particular languages persists over time only by virtue of it being repeatedly used to generate linguistic data, and this data being used as input to the learner. In this sense, we can think of the adaptation of languages themselves to fit the needs of the language user and more fundamentally to the language learner, end quote.
Wow, that is truly fascinating. I'd never thought about language in that way. And
let me guess, you have a metamorphosis connection.
How'd you figure it out?
There seem to be trends in your use of language.
If you say so. Anyway, this idea of how language fits the needs of the learner relates to the metamorphosis, even if indirectly. Gregor's family's use of language dramatically changes after his transformation. Gregor notes how they speak in low voices at all hours of the day and completely avoid any topic that might bring up his condition. I guess you could say that they have adapted their use of language to their own needs. However, Gregor's needs are ignored, as his family refuses to speak to him, even though he would be able to understand. Lack of human connection through language is perhaps one of the most prominent things that sped up his metamorphosis away from humanity. Don't you agree?
I can see how that connects to the evolution of language, specifically to the individual's linguistic impact on the culture. And I'm more comfortable with the science of it.
That's perfectly fine. After all, I am here to make connections. Well, thanks for all your linguistic knowledge, Tanasha.
Anytime, Sacha. Perhaps we shall meet again.
Okay, well, I guess I should have expected that.